of violence against women, and proud to be joining GMAC and excited for this dynamic conversation. Our discussion today is titled Young African Women Speak Out on Gender-Based Violence. We look forward to listen and to brilliant frontline responders and change makers in their communities who'll be sharing their experiences, outlining challenges and gaps, and also putting forward recommendations for us to reflect on. Our session today will be 1.5 hours. We have already eaten into 15 minutes, so we will have a bit of adjustments as we go. Some of the, as we call on the panelists, we are sure we'll be having insightful remarks being mentioned. So just to say, our hashtags for the day are 1, COVID-19 gender responses, and 2nd, Orange the World. So it's now my honor and pleasure to invite our first panelist, Ms. Nkiruka Stella Okonkwo. Ms. Stella is the CEO and founder for Fresh and Young Brains Development, and I will just honor and read her bio briefly. Give me a second, please. I actually had this before, apologies. Yeah, Ms. Stella is a CEO founder for Fresh and Young Brains Development Initiative, and also she's part of the Alexigen Consoles. She has over 2 decades in the nonprofit sector and has contributed immensely to gender and youth development across Nigeria and beyond. She represents the Women and Youth Caucus in the Pan-African Agribusiness Apex Body Steering Committee. So Ms. Nkiruka will be speaking to us from a young women's perspective, and she'll be outlining for us what do you see as the role of national governments to recognize the increase in sexual and gender-based violence in a post-pandemic world? What are your recommendations as a youth leader for the government to include SDBV responses in COVID-19 response policies and mechanisms? Over to you, Ms. Nkiruka. And you have 7 minutes for your intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, glad to be here. Thanks a lot, GMAC and ActionAid, for inviting me. Yeah, so I would say that the government has a lot of work to do at all levels of governance, looking at the local, the provincial, the national, the sub-regional, regional, continental
We now
level.
lost you, Madam Nkiruka.
Okay. Okay, can you hear me now? Network is a bit erratic here.
Yes, we can hear you. And if your network is bad, you can switch off video if that helps.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, yeah. So governments at all levels have a key role to play in promoting the sexual and reproductive health rights of women and girls. And this is especially as regards the SGBV. So for me, the first thing I feel is the role of the government is to review existing legal and policy framework
We are having trouble hearing you again, Madam Nkiruka. You're breaking up.
Especially those policy and legal framework that promotes. Can you hear me?
You're breaking up quite a lot.
Okay, can you get to the next panelist, and let me see if I can switch the internet server.
It's better now. It's better.
Oh, okay, awesome. So I was saying that government at all levels have a key role to play as regards reviewing the existing legal policy framework to ensure that issues that affect women and girls are covered, especially as regards their sexual reproductive health and rights and sexual gender-based violence. And specifically for the African government, I will recommend that the government looks at the domesticating the UN CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, at all levels across Africa, and also look at the Child's Rights Act to ensure that the rights of women and children, women and girls are protected. Secondly, the government has a role to play when it comes to providing access to legal services. And one of the things government can do in terms of this role will be to provide toll-free hotlines and emergency phone lines that possibly are linked to security forces and the Legal Aid Council at the various country levels, so that women and girls that have their rights violated can reach out. Yeah, then there's need for government to support the FIDA, the Federation of Women Lawyers, at all levels, both in country and at the regional level, and other CSOs that are gender-based and working to promote the rights of women and girls. This would be to help them provide psychosocial support and pro bono legal services to the victims of violence. And some of the things that can be done will be for the various ministries of women affairs and gender affairs to collaborate with the gender-based organizations to ensure that they facilitate timely and qualitative access to justice. Now, finally, for me on this point, I would say that there is need for African government to have a specialized SGBV emergency unit created in various hospitals, clinics, maternity centers, health centers that can help receive victims and provide temporary shelter for these women and girls. And this should be funded properly and equipped by government. Now, for the second question you asked us regarding my recommendation as a young women activist, I would say that looking at the impact of COVID, you can see that women have actually, and girls have actually faced a lot, because they are now, sometimes they find themselves locked in the same environment with their violators. So for me, I see a future of an African society where the rights of women are respected and promoted. So I will encourage and recommend to our African government to ensure they wear the gender lens, to ensure that gender is mainstreamed across all aspects of the COVID-19 response measures and palliative being given. We need to call within this webinar to call on government to give at least a minimum of 30% quota for all services and palliatives to be given to women and girls so that their core issues and aspirations can be taken care of. And from this, a special fund can be created to support the victims of the violations to come back on their feet, to reintegrate them into society and possibly to start their enterprises. And finally, I will recommend that the SGBV stories of change and testimonies can also be gathered and documented and possibly shared with policymakers and influencers so that we can engage more on advocacy to ensure that there is access to justice for them. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Madam Kiruka. Such brilliant responses across the response on domesticating laws, on funding and ensuring a strong, robust domestic resource allocation. I do like your strong recommendations on integrating a gender lens to economic recovery, to COVID-19 response. And we'll come back to elaborate on some of the aspects you've outlined. Just to ask my colleagues, Udasi and Elisa, if we have a second panelist. If not, we'll transition to Evelyn. Do we have Miss Jubilant yet?
No, not yet. Please continue.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So we'll transition to our other panelist, Miss Evelyn Onyango. Miss Evelyn Onyango is a human rights activist from Kenya. And I'll just read her bio as well. Miss Evelyn Onyango is a human rights activist, a community volunteer, and has passion for empowerment of the girl child. She's a member of Young Urban Women Kenya. She volunteers as a systems operator for Africa Youth Trust. In her role, she monitors and refers cases of gender-based violence reported reported through an innovative online reporting platform that enables survivors to report and receive medical, legal, and psychosocial support. Evelyn is also a coach of her local football team, where she also mentors other young women. So Miss Evelyn Onyango will be speaking to us about 16 days of activism. Today is 16 days of activism, and our theme is respond, prevent, fund, and collect. So as a young woman activist, Miss Evelyn, where do you think we have the biggest progress in fighting violence against women and girls? What challenges remain or persist to date? And what role has technology played on matters of violence against women and girls? Over to you, Miss Evelyn. You have 7 minutes. Miss Evelyn, are you there? We cannot hear you. Maybe you're muted. Can somebody help with checking, please? If Miss Evelyn is getting ready, do we have the green light to proceed with our next speaker?
Hi.
Okay, thank you, Miss Evelyn. You can proceed. Please unmute yourself. You're muted. Please unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone.
Hi, we can hear you. Please proceed.
Yeah, thank you. As you have said, I'm Evelyn, based in Mukuru Slum Settlement. So concerning the grievances of today, we have succeeded in raising awareness on the different types of violence, women's rights, and referral pathways. This is normally through community forum meetings. Women and girls have become more empowered in terms of economic empowerment and awareness of rights, and they are able to challenge violence. The use of psychosocial support, whereby survivors undergo counseling regularly, help them heal past trauma and speak against violence. Survivors were also trained on economic empowerment initiative and give seed capital to raise their livelihood income. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hi.
Miss Evelyn, we can hear you. Yes, please proceed.
Oh, thank you. On challenges, there is still a lot of stigma together with the low self-esteem as a result of violence, which makes survivor not to report. The use of kangaroo courts, whereby families choose to solve cases of violence out of court, hence denies the survivor justice. Lack of sufficient knowledge and skill in handling of cases from police, being sensitive to survivors that report and how to evidence is preserved. Despite raising the awareness on women's rights and different types of violence, there is still a large group of people yet to be reached. Lack of such of income still exposes a lot of women and girls to violence. Then in terms of technologies, with the use of technologies as a SMS platform, we are able to report cases because of confidentiality, whereby instead of reporting at police station where they may face stigma, we are normally use SMS platform, the survivor can be linked. Then technology can also be used to raise awareness, for example, through dispatch bulk SMS and also for advocacy purposes. Through the use of technologies, for example, use of mobile means, you can easily reach the survivor that needs help and make follow-up. It also encourages more people to report their cases since it is easier and it is toll-free. Pleasure. I think I'm done.
Thank you so much, Ms. Evelyn, for speaking powerfully around robust survivor referral pathways, for speaking about broad-based advocacy, and for very strongly articulating how we address stigma and confidentiality. And thank you so much for being such a powerful young woman activist. I appreciate. So we'll transition to our next speaker. And we were supposed to have Dr. Nyaradzai Gumbos-Vanda, the African Union Goodwill Ambassador on ending child marriage, and the and the CEO of Rosaria Memorial Trust. Dr. Nyaradzai will be represented by Ms. Ruazano, who will be representing Rosaria as well. But it will be great for us to just hear some of the accomplishments that and the bio we have for Dr. Nyaradzai, who is unable to join us because of challenges of connectivity. So Dr. Nyaradzai is the African Union Goodwill Ambassador on ending child marriage since 2014. She's also the current chair of ActionAid International. She's also the founder and chief executive of Rosaria Memorial Trust. She previously served as the general secretary of the World Young Women Christian Association. She's a trained human rights lawyer with extensive experience in conflict resolution and mediation, and has worked within the UN system on various roles and across multilateral systems as well. So Ms. Ruazano, if you could just respond to us as part of the African Union's commitment towards implementing Maputo Protocol, how do you think the AU can support young women and civil society organizations in fighting sexual gender-based violence as part of the COVID-19 pandemic recovery efforts? Also, how much funding has already gone into addressing violence against women and girls? And what are some of the noticeable trends in the gender disaggregated data collected to this time? Over to you, Ms. Ruazano. And as you do that, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about yourself, because we didn't read your bio. Thank you. And you have 8 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much, Catherine. My name is Ruazano. I'm the Research and Advocacy Officer at Rosaria Memorial Trust. We work with girls and women on different aspects in terms of education, health, access to information on SRA, HRA, and we are in Murewa, the rural community, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I'll be presenting on behalf of Dr. Nyaradzai from Uganda. She could not be able to connect with you all, so I'll be giving the presentation. So on the question that you highlighted, we've seen there's been strong awareness raising and discussions with African Union, SADC, in country and in the communities. However, this has not been followed by sufficient resources or funding. And also the other issue is that the funds are not accessible, especially for women, young women and girls group, especially in the communities. What we've realized as well is that for groups in communities, this is much more difficult because funds are more available to international and national organizations. As Rosaria Memorial Trust, we appreciate the donors and initiatives that have been intentional in responding to women and community. As Rosaria Memorial Trust, we have valued the approaches by Women's Funds, especially Agent Action Fund, Amplify Change, and others like ELMA, Philanthropies, VIVOS, Plan, and others who focus on communities and empowerment of girls and also changing social norms. What we recommend is that government should increase funds in the national budget for public services, such as education, health, livelihoods, employment, which prevents child marriages, and also to support girls who have experienced child marriages. Just recently, as Rosaria Memorial Trust, we had a research on COVID-19 and child marriage. And what we realized is that even though the different countries have been given funds on COVID-19, the focus was more on prevention of COVID-19. Other than the other aspects of child marriage, that has been rampant, especially during COVID-19. As Rosario Memorial Trust, we have a shelter where we received so many cases of gender-based violence, cases of girls who were being abused and raped during the lockdown. So this was a major concern for us to say the funds were not there for us to be able to assist them, but we could only refer them to other partners who could be able to assist them. So that was another issue that we realized that it was an issue in terms of the funding being available to be able to assist cases that were coming to the center. So we really recommend that funds, they should be gender focused, and also appreciating that even though they are gender focused, they should reach especially to the communities, to the rural communities, where most of the time the funds only reach to maybe national organizations and organizations that are at international level. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Rua. And I wanted to just hold you back before you we wrap up this discussion. You talk about funding. Kripa has spoken about funding. And I think some of the things we are seeing is with COVID-19, we know that in most of our countries, the gender issues are the least budgeted for, especially from national governments. How do we incentivize our governments? As you're saying, we're calling for gender responsive public infrastructure, but how do we incentivize our governments or lobby for them to do these allocations without relying on donor funding, which we know as a result of COVID-19 will be drying up? And this is not peculiar to Zimbabwe. I think it's across the continent. So just want you to speak a little bit more on that, then we can have the final speaker as well. So thank you, Rua, and sorry for holding you ransom.
No, it's fine. Thank you so much, Catherine. What I think when I'm talking about funding, I'm not just talking about donor funding. I'm also talking about, we have so many funds that are in the community that we are not taking advantage of. So we've got human resources in the community. We've got people who are willing to make a change in the community using their own funds. So I think sometimes it's not just us holding the government accountable for the funds or the donor funding, but we need to really look into what do we have in the community, so that when the donors and the government funds for different community activities that we are doing, it's also starting from where we've already started from. So to say we already have a center, a community shelter, how can then the government or the donor come in and fund for that community shelter to protect girls who face gender-based violence or sexual violence? I hope I answered you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And we'll come back to some of that discussion later. So we'll have our last speaker, Ms. Jubilant Yevue Assis. She's joined us from Ghana. So Ms. Jubilant is from the, I can't pronounce this and I'll try. It's from the Adaklu community district in the Volta region of Ghana. She's a woman farmer. She's a women's farmer leader in her district. She has a keen interest in women's participation in community and district assembly and local leadership. Local decision-making processes as well. She has campaigned on ending violence against women and girls, and this has subsequently led to the construction of a district police station in her locality. Such brilliant frontline efforts you're doing, Madam Jubilant. And just to ask you the question, number one, how do you think COVID-19 has exacerbated young women's vulnerabilities, especially in the rural areas, and increased SGBV? That's the first question. And secondly, what kind of evidence, if any, is collected in the rural areas and by who? And that's the second question. And what kind of community systems are in place and how are young women involved? Over to you, Ms. Jubilant, and you have 7 minutes. Ms. Jubilant, are you with us? Can you hear us?
Hi, Azumi, can you confirm you can hear us? Azumi, I believe you are with our panelists.
Okay, she's outside. Our panelists can promote her, please.
Okay. Do we wait or can we proceed with some of the other panelists?
She has been promoted. I can confirm she has been. I see she's now on the panel list. Yes, thank you.
That's great. I'm glad to repeat the questions if you didn't hear them.
Hello, Azumi. Is everything okay with the panelists? Thank you.
Hello, can you hear us now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great.
Do you want me to repeat the questions?
Please, yes.
Sorry,
There's a lot of there's an echo. Yeah, there's an echo.
there are two devices connected, and as
Yeah.
Yes, I've put off one.
Please do that. Yeah, thank you. It's better now. I'll repeat the questions.
Okay.
Thank you. So, Ms. Jubilant, the first question is, I have 3 questions for you. The first question is, how do you think COVID-19 has exacerbated young women's vulnerabilities, especially in rural areas, and how has that increased SGBV? That's the first question. Number 2, what kind of evidence, if any, is being collected in the rural areas, and who is collecting this evidence? That's number 2. And number 3 is, what kind of community support systems are in place and how are young women involved? So over to you, and you have 7 minutes. Thank you.
Women generally experience gender-based violence, whether rural or urban, whether educated or uneducated. Rural women are more likely to experience more gender-based violence. They are not employed or skilled. Issues of violence are common in the life of young rural women. They experience domestic violence as many families are not able to provide food, and many husbands may refuse to provide or give in times of difficulty. COVID has made young rural women more open to gender-based violence, especially those in the informal sector. They have lost their job and income. There have been increase in teenage pregnancy since the COVID set in. Due to the school closure, teenage pregnancy have been increased to 9-fold. For example, 51 young women reported pregnancy in the Karachi West area between March and May. It increased the amount spent on unpaid care work because the children are now in the house. So the mother is to care for them from morning to evening, doing washing, cooking, etc. It also leads to violence because when the mother is busy taking care of the kids and food is not prepared on time, it brings quarrel between the husband and the wife. Evidence put in place, or evidence that we've gathered so far, anti-violence platform or combat is monitoring cases of violence in various communities since they are community-based. So they are able to collect cases in various communities about gender-based violence. The nurses support in home visits, whereby they get to know that many teenagers were pregnant during the school closure. They take it as opportunity to be loitering around or going to their boyfriends. During the national BECE and WASSCE examinations, teachers confirmed or got to know that a lot of their candidates were pregnant and they announced it. Currently, the community support system that we got support from Action Aid, they educate men in various communities to support women in unpaid care work or household chores. So now it is better because a lot of men are now giving support in the house while the children too are in the house. They can bath them or wash their things. The anti-violence platform and combat do sensitizations and they educate the elder people or the household they educate them to reduce gender-based violence. Also, the educations on saving scheme of rural women, a lot of young women get support from this saving scheme that they get some loan that help them to set up their own business. Many rural farmers also engage themselves in backyard gardening, whereby they produce a lot of vegetables and they purchase or they get ready markets for it in their community and beyond the community. Also, young women were trained on soap making. So during this COVID time, a lot of them produced soap in huge number, which yield them to increase their income. The government supports through the Ministry of Gender by distributing of foodstuffs for about 4,000 individuals. Some were prepared for lunch and some houses were given foodstuffs, and a lot of young women are part or involved in this item. Or a lot of young women were benefited from this item. In conclusion with I recommend that the government to support especially the rural area farmers or the women in the rural areas that are farmers to provide them good seeds so that we can use to produce a lot that can help the nation world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jubilant. I will really appreciate your very robust interventions around outlining the vulnerabilities young women in rural areas face, talking about how being in the informal sector and mostly occupying the lower cadres of jobs has really exposed women to vulnerability and loss of employment and livelihood, speaking about social norms, the burden of care work, and the importance of us having a holistic approach to empowerment. So thank you so much for that. I wanted to go back to Evelyn. If you could just speak a little bit more, you spoke very strongly around mobile technology and how you use SMS platforms for your work. Have you seen other young women using social media and digital media now that everything has moved online? It will be helpful for us to hear from you, Evelyn, just a bit more expansion around use of digital media and some of the challenges that young women face from that. So Evelyn, if you're still with us, if you just expound on that, I wanted us to have a much more robust conversation and continue the discussion as we wait to see from the chat if we have questions. So Miss Evelyn, do you want to respond? Miss Evelyn Onyango.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, the technology has made it easier, such as you realize we have got SMS platform whereby we report the cases, that is 21094. At times you realize young women has got some issue with them, so they fear reporting directly from the police, just because there are those who are normally harassed them, so they tend to report the cases through 21094. So they tend to be all that secretive. The confidentiality is preserved. So it encourages them more to report cases since it's also easier and it is toll free. They don't use a lot of credit, it is free of charge. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Evelyn. Ms. Nkriuka, are you still with us? The first panelist we had. Ms. Nkriuka, are you still with us?
Hi, Catherine. I think she's having trouble connecting. She got
Okay.
logged out and she's unable to log back. So I've asked Keith to help her.
Thank you. So I'll just go back to Ruwazano again before I come back to Ms. Jubilant. So Ms. Ruwazano, Nkiruka spoke about domestication, ratification, and implementation of international, regional instruments and policies like CEDAW. You spoke about Maputo Protocol. But I think, and you spoke that, you mentioned that accountability for government should take different forms, including us adopting innovative ways of fundraising. However, how do we continue to hold our government accountable to their commitments to, one, respect human rights of girls and women across the spectrum, and with declarations like CEDAW, Maputo Protocol, and others? How do we continue to keep that narrative alive? Because we know that even when our governments ratify CEDAW, ratify Maputo, we rarely see a strong, robust implementation. There is no funding for its reporting. So Rua, how do we revive and breathe fire into this commitment our governments have made?
Thank you so much, Catherine, for that important question. I think recently we just had a meeting with local councillors and traditional leaders on the SADC model law. So we were disseminating we translated the SADC model law into Shona, working with I Am Swedish. And then we had a dissemination meeting with local councillors and traditional leaders. What was interesting for me was to say these policies are done at international level or at national level, but do they really reach to the community level, to the leaders at community level? What if we start disseminating or advocating at a community level, and then it builds up? Because what I know is when we were having the meeting with the MPs and local councillors, they were actually saying, why are we not pushing for this? And yet we are in the SADC model law and we've got roles and responsibility in the SADC model law. Why? Well, the reason they were saying was because we knew about it, but not an in-depth dissemination was done at local level. So for me, I feel like for all those policies, if we really look at it from a level where we are saying this is where the community is at, the local councillors, the MPs, the community leaders, I know that they will push the agenda. It will make sure that those policies are implemented. So that was one of the interesting things that I realized, to say the policies are there and the leaders know about them. But then how we can hold them accountable is to say, you know about these policies, how are you doing it? How can we as organizations help you? How is the community can help you to ensure that these issues are implemented? Recently, we even started working with traditional leaders on coming up with bylaws on ending child marriages, which is a first in Zimbabwe for traditional leaders to say we are coming up with bylaws on protecting girls from child marriage and also supporting girls who have experienced child marriages. It was an interesting initiative that they did after we had done the dissemination of the SADC model law. So I think for me, it all started at community level. Maybe I'm being biased because I'm working in the community more than at national level, but I just feel that's where we can start implementing those amazing policies that have been put in place. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rua, for that really brilliant example of how we can take commitments at the regional level and make them responsive and speak to our realities at community level. Ms. Jubilant, I wanted to come back to you. I know a lot of us, we limit young women's engagement and leadership to the local level. I think that's great, but we want to be both leaders in our communities, but also leaders at all levels of representation. We know Ghana is having an election soon, in maybe 3 weeks. If you could tell us whether you think the climate right now with COVID, we will see better representation of women beyond just local leadership to maybe parliament and other positions. Do you think that the advocacy that has been done and the opportunity for COVID will open up space for leadership, especially young women in levels right from the local to national level? Ms. Jubilant.
In my nation now, young women are now contesting for member of parliament. So we need organizations to support them, that young women can also get positions or take part in their participations. In this year election. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jubilant. I see we have Madam Kiruka back. Can you hear us, Ms. Kiruka?
Yes, I can.
Thank you so much. So I wanted for you to, you had spoken earlier on around toll-free lines, around women's rights organization and their frontline work, and civil society. If you could just give us an example or just a sense of the funding landscape and how the civil society who are doing the brilliant work of prevention, response, and support for survivors, whether the resources, whether they have the resources to do that, and whether not just the civil society, but also whether the government is adequately investing, especially in these aspects, as part of their COVID-19 responses. In many cases, we have seen COVID-19 task forces across the world. I think the CARE report showed that in most of the countries, I think across the world almost, we didn't have any that met the threshold of 2/3 representation. So maybe it's different for Nigeria. If you could just give us an example around how people are agitating for representation in COVID-19 responses, and whether you're seeing investments as a result of this advocacy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Catherine. Yes, I agree that some work is being done, but what I've seen so far is that individual organizations are directly seeking funding for what they do. Because we have organizations that are focusing on rape cases where the women are raped, and they're working with the FIDA, the Federation of Women Lawyers. And we've also seen cases where the victims themselves reach out through the social media, and some organizations take it up. But so far, I have not really seen where within the COVID-19 response mechanisms that we have a direct funding for SGBV related issues. And this is one of the things that I feel the webinar is meant to help us to trigger, so that government prioritizes that. Because we've had so many cases, and I remember towards the end of November or early next year, countries should prepare for issues of maternity. You know, and because we've seen cases where young girls are raped, or because people really were not going out during the lockdown period. A lot of people were exposed to sexual relationships, and at the end of the day, within 9 months, we'll be expecting to see the high rate of people going to hospitals to give birth. And I will not be surprised if some of these young women who are victims do not have access to the hospitals because of issues of finance. So that is one of the reasons that in my earlier response, I clamored for a special fund to be given. And government can do this through working with the civil society organizations through the partnership with the UN Women in the various countries, funding the CSOs, and in partnership with the federal ministries of Women Affairs and Gender Affairs, so that way it's easier to track and monitor what is going on and then collate. I will also propose a need to have a joint donor basket fund approach to issues of funding on SGBV, because that's one of the ways that we can actually track and monitor what is going on. Yeah, so I guess this is what I can say is happening at the moment.
Thank you so much, Madam Kiruka. I will now open our Q&A session. I know I'll ask my colleagues Elisa and Wudasi and Keith to help me outline some of the questions being put forward by our audience. Do we have questions to pose to the panelists at this time? And if we do not, can we maybe do the poll if one of the colleagues will help me with running the poll?
Catherine, Keith will
Yes.
support with the poll, but in the meantime, until we have hands up from the participants, maybe you continue a conversation with the panelists on this particular issues.
All right, maybe we can run the poll and have a discussion around the findings of the poll. So we do have a question for the poll, and our colleague and technical lead will be helping us run a poll. So our discussion, we have a question around our perspectives on violence against women. As we mentioned at the beginning of, as I was introducing the session, today is the International Day of Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls, and also the beginning of the 16 days of activism against violence against women and girls and GBV, all forms of GBV. So we have questions for you to respond to. Maybe Juliet and Keith, you can guide us as to how this will be done, and so that we can see that some of the responses we'll be getting. So I'll mute myself and then hand over to you to just guide us around this process.
All right, thank you so much, Catherine, for such an insightful session. And what colleagues you're seeing on your screen, I hope maybe Catherine, before you mute, would you confirm that the poll is viewable to all attendees?
Yes, Juliet, it is.
Okay, great. So what we have are just 2 questions. And basically we want to do, we are just want to invite you and encourage you to take part in this poll to more or less gauge what your opinion is with regards to sexual gender-based violence. And as you can see, the first question is about how can both men and women work together to address sexual and gender-based violence at national level. You are allowed to just click either of the options. So once you click, we have a real-time voting process underway. So as of now, if you look at your screen and if you're able to see the poll, we have only 2 out of 7 who have voted so far, representing 28%. So if you are a participant in the room, please feel free to click your option. Question 1, how can both men and women work together to address SGBV at national level? Would it be to develop programs that are inclusive and responsive to all in the context of sexual gender-based violence? Or would it be having inclusive data on victims of gender and allocating resources adequately? And then also there's question 2 that talks about how do you rate the level of sexual gender-based violence in your community, high, low, unsure. So let's do so in 1 minute. We are going to stop the poll when it's 3 minutes in and then share the results. So feel free to continue voting. I can see the numbers are increasing. Please continue voting. Yes, there we go. We can see real-time results on how everyone else is voting. Let's get going. Let's get voting. We are at 83%. So let's continue and make it 100% voting. Exactly. Now, exactly 6 out of 6. Okay. The poll says like there's been 100% voting, and now the results are actually out because it's real time. And indeed, most of you would prefer having inclusive data on victims. Yeah, let's get the poll result. Yeah, still up. Thank you very much. So most of you have voted. The ones in red are the most numbers of people prefer to go with that option, which is having inclusive data on victims of both gender and allocating resources adequately. I think I've had a lot of discussions on, the kind of grassroots interventions, ensuring that grassroots communities at the grassroots enjoy these rights on gender-based violence. So that as well looks like under question 1, that is the winning answer. And 2, under question 2, how do you relate the levels of GBV in your community? 83% think it's extremely high. And then we have 17% for low. And this is really interesting. If I could, if Catherine, you allow, would probably want to take like 1 or 2 comments on why is it that they would prefer, or you would prefer, to have data on victims of gender and allocating resources at community level. And also just to know why is it that there's a very high prevalence of SGBV in your community. It would be very interesting to hear from those who voted why they think it's high in the community, and also why we think we should invest in a lot of data, gender disaggregated data, and allocate resources adequately. So if you would like to give an opinion on why you've voted what you've voted, please raise your hand, and I think we'll be able to pick you and hear from you what your thoughts are. Yes, if anyone's hand is, Keith, if you can spot a hand, please let me know. Or in case you have audio issues, please feel free to put it on the chat box if you wouldn't like to speak. Attendees room.
Maybe you can randomly pick from the attendees, if that's okay. We don't have so many. Yeah, maybe you could do that, Juliet.
Yeah. Oh, someone raised their hand. It's just that I'm unable to see from this end. Ajo, is it Ajo? Someone called Ajo?
Yes, that's Ajo, and he's been permitted to speak.
Okay.
They all have talking permission. Thanks.
All right, Ajo, tell us which of the options you chose and why you chose them in relation to the topic of the day. Ajo, please unmute. Ajo, you are on mute in case you've already started speaking. Ajo, please unmute. Okay, as Ajo tries to unmute, is there a hand from the audience? Unfortunately, I can't see all the attendees. So kids, if you have all the attendees beyond the panelists, I think I can only see the panelists window, not the attendees.
Okay, we have Agnes, we have Catherine, we have Eniola, we have Eunice, we have Trufena and Anna.
Trufena. Trufena, if you could promote Trufena to be able to speak.
All of them actually have been permitted to speak.
Okay.
So it's to unmute your mic and you're good to go. But I'm happy to support if anybody's having a challenge by just dropping on chat.
Okay, Trufena, can you hear me? Hannah? Hannah? Okay, we can't seem to get hold of. Okay, there's an Ibrahim Bob.
Catherine.
Catherine.
Nkiru here. Can I suggest that maybe the attendees can send in their input through the chat box if they're having issues with their audio?
Yeah, not a problem at all. They can actually do so. All right. Ajo, I wish we could hear you speak, or I'm just calling on anyone in the attendance list who would be interested in talking. Agnes, I saw you unmute your mic.
Yes, I unmuted because the host was asking me to unmute, but I didn't have a contribution to make. So, yeah, I just unmuted.
All right.
Yeah.
Did you vote for the poll?
Yes, I did.
Okay. All right, Trufena, can you hear me? I'm just speaking on anyone who voted and being able to share why the cases of SGBV are high in their community. Anyone who is willing to share can also let me know, or I pick on anyone. Haman? Looks like most of us. Haman?
Juliet?
Most of us, yes.
So I don't think we have anyone's hand up at the moment. So maybe we can just continue the conversation with our panelists.
All right. Yeah, it would have been pretty much interesting to hear from all of us who voted on why the kind of violence that we experience in our communities and why probably it is really high. But as the conversation continues, please feel free to put it on the chat box in case you have something to say about and contribute about what options you voted for, and we'll be glad to share within the course of the meeting.
Maybe just to add to the discussion, I can also share my thoughts on this. I believe the reason why we're actually seeing an exacerbated number of sexual and gender-based violence during COVID times is that I think it all boils down to the issue of governance. So whether it's from a peace and security angle, whether it's from a health angle or the education angle, the economic empowerment angle, all these elements require a very strong and structured governance structure that is transparent and accountable. And I think personally, I would say, this is a personal opinion, but I would say I can start from my own country. The governance structure that we have and we are implementing lacks accountability and transparency. And in the absence of this very critical elements, it will be very difficult to even think of minimizing sexual and gender-based violence, as lack of accountability and transparency can actually lead to conflict and issues of dissatisfaction with health facilities, with education facilities, and with the economic empowerment facilities. So a society which is not economically empowered, which is not educated, which doesn't have the necessary health facilities, and overall, which is not informed and given the opportunity to thrive, would be susceptible to sexual and gender-based violences. And the power relations that we are seeing right now between men and female, I think, are actually a result of this. So this is my opinion. I will, as I said in the start of my statement, I would say that it's all boils down to the structure of governance that we have and ensuring that there is an accountable and transparent system that is democratic. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Udasi. That's quite a detailed explanation on why the prevalence of SGBV is quite strong at community level, and also sharing my experience as well. It's part of it is what has been mentioned here today, the fact that there's not enough knowledge on on the rights of the community members, on even the laws that have been approved at national level, at regional level, not being aware of where to report to once this happens, the fear of excommunication by community members, especially if the traditional beliefs and cultures are very ingrained to every individual in that community. And so even when you're being, subjected to some form of harmful practice or form of violence, you are unable to say because it's regarded as a form of weakness. Once you speak out or you cry around it, it's regarded as a form of weakness. So I think this is, like we're talking here today, the need to empower communities to be able to address this issue, to speak out and participate extensively in safeguarding their rights. All right, thank you so much. This is all we had for the polling results. Please feel free to tweet #OrangeTheWorld around these conversations, and we'll be sure to reshare with the rest of the network. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliet. I really also resonate with Budasi's comments around peace and security. And, I think it's important to realize that there are different levels of violence women face. And while most of our discussions focus on intimate partner violence, individual violence, there is also quite a lot of structural violence that women face, such as criminalization of various aspects of our lives. For example, accessing reproductive rights services. You see that women with HIV status tend to be criminalized. We see women of diverse sexual orientation, gender identities being criminalized. We've seen, as part of some of the responses of COVID have resulted into augmenting structural barriers for accessing services. So I think I do share a lot of the perspectives shared during the polling. And thanks so much for leading us so brilliantly into that. So I wanted to call upon my panelists one last time. For us, I think while we've mentioned today is at the beginning of 16 days, it's important for us to start powerfully with a strong message, with a strong call to action. So I wanted to give each of the 4 panelists an opportunity, 2 minutes, to give us closing remarks and a call to action. What is the one thing you want the world to know? The world in terms of government, civil society, fellow activists, donors. What is the one thing that you want people to know or one thing that we need to do to end violence against women and girls? And so as you do that, you also feel free to close your remarks and give us your parting shots. So I'll start with you, Evelyn. I see you're ready on video. I'll start with you, Evelyn, for you to give us your call to action and closing remarks.
Yeah. Well, thank you once again. Can you hear me? Hi, everyone.
Yes, we can hear you, Madam.
Yeah, thank you once again. Thank you for the time we've been together. What I can just talk about is let us speak out for help. Let us not hesitate. Don't take things for granted. At least when something bad happens, be ready to share and have trust with one another. They normally say when you share the problem, you somehow happily solve. So just let us speak out for help. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. Let's break down the silence. Let's amplify our voices and let's support survivors. That's a very powerful message. Over to you, Jubilant, for your closing remarks and call to action. And please, I hope you can hear us.
Thank you very much. My message is that all governments to release funds to the GDVS that can help young to share their views or to eliminate gender-based violence across the nation, because it is time to stop gender-based violence across the nations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jubilant. Such a powerful message. We appreciate. So next is Nkiruka. If you could just take a few minutes to give us your call to action and closing remarks as well.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll summarize it in this way by saying that both the gender-based organizations and women all over the world, and of course in Africa, we need to give a helping hand to the victims and also give them a shoulder to lean on. For our government, when government needs to provide an enabling environment that facilitates access to justice at zero cost to the victims, so that way the issue of stigma and violence against them can be reduced. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nkiruka. Very powerful message. I'll now hand it over to Ruadzano for your call to action and closing remarks.
Yeah. Okay, I mean,
You are muted. I think that's the most famous phrase of 2020.
Okay, thank you so much, Catherine. For me, I think my call to action is let's not normalize what's not normal. So when we talk about child marriage, when we talk about rape, when we talk about incest, we need to call it what it is. It's an abuse to the girls and young women. It's an abuse to women as a whole. So let's not normalize by using fancy language on issues that should be named as they are. If it's rape, let's call it rape. I've seen a headline where it says teacher sleeps with 15-year-old. Instead of them saying teacher rapes a 15-year-old, they normalized it by giving it a fancy headline. So for me, I think it's the languaging that should change. Let's call it what it is. If it's abuse, let's call it abuse. That's the action point from my side. And I also just want to thank you for giving us this platform to have this very important discussion. And I hope we all have a great 16 days of activism to continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see Madam Kumba Fal has her hand raised. So Madam Kumba, if you could take the floor also and make some remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you to all the panelists. I'm very sorry because I really wanted to follow you all in this discussion, but unfortunately due to other engagement, I followed some discussion and I was just putting my inputs on the chat box just to bring also my voice. I think we have heard very good practices, but also recommendations. Something maybe we have not touched a bit is how we look at our education curriculum. How do we start educating our young people in the issue of gender-based violence? You know, I like to recall what UNESCO says. It's in the head of the men that we build or we create a war. So we need to go back in their mind to build peace. I think the same should apply for gender-based violence. We have to ensure that we bring this issue to our young boys, to educate and as mother, I think we need also to take that agenda in our families. How do we educate our boys so that when they get older, they're educated on respecting their partner, on on silencing gender-based violence. I think we need really to articulate our work at community level to ensure that we are not only us fighting for that. We need our champions, our male, our young boys to be familiar with this issue, because they are I mean, I don't want to stereotype, but they are caused, they are accused of gender violence. So how do we educate them to understand the impact? And it's not only you know, now today we see more and more other form of violence, more than physical violence. You know, what do we do with the economic violence? What do we do with the psychology? You know, all those form of violence. We need to make sure that we are working at the community level, in schools, in our families. So my call for action is really to bring the issue to at that level in our discussion. And lastly, I think what I wanted also to add is that Senegal, for example, has adopted last year, and I wish we need also to bring more francophones in these discussions. Senegal has criminalized rape and pedophilia. It would be good as GMAC and this network to follow up on how it has changed in the country, because it came last year because we were facing a lot of violence, all the places, and the civil society stand up and campaign and brought the issue to the gender minister, and we drafted the protocol, we drafted the paper. And we went to the president, and we're lucky that he take it as a law. So where are we? So we need to monitor and see how we can also use that to promote in other countries, and see if it has changes. Probably, certainly, I say it has changes, but we need to document that also. So thank you very much. Thank you for the very good sharing and practices, and congratulations to our young people. I heard a lot of interesting contributions. Thank you. That was from Kumba, from FAS, Farm Africa Solidarity from Dakar. Merci.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. So thank you so much. It's been an honor to moderate this session. And as a parting shot, I think it's important for us to reflect on some of the powerful key messages coming out. I'll attempt as a moderator to just wrap this up with a summary of some of the elements that I have picked up throughout the discussion. It's not to say that this is the only confines of the discussion today, but just for us to reflect on as we begin the 16 days. So the power of language. I do agree with you, Madam Rua, that I think language is one of the most critical tools and a very powerful aspect of shifting narratives and shifting discussions. So some of us throughout the discussion kept using the word victims. And I think it's important for us to embrace the word survivors, because when we keep saying victims, 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 we further reinforce the power dynamic that most women and girls have to live within a society of patriarchy. So I think it's not just on articulating child early forced marriage, but it is also in terms of how we continue to carry out the discourse on violence against women and girls. So I would urge for us to shift from the language of victims to a more survivor-centric approaches, because then we start to recognize the voice and agency, and we start to see women beyond this aspect of these instances of violations they have gone through. Secondly, the gender responsiveness, gender responsive public policies, the recommendation for gender responsive public policy, gender responsive public infrastructure, and COVID-19 responses. I cannot emphasize the importance of this enough, because this is where our government is putting money in terms of policy frameworks, in terms of COVID-19, and in terms of public services. So we must continue to call for them to be gender responsive. And as a feminist, as you saw on the poster today, my title was African Feminist. Some of the two identities I think are important. And that brings me to my other point about intersectionality. Women go through violence, and as Kumba has said, women sometimes go through multiple forms of violence, multiple intersecting forms of violence, economic violence, sexual violence, different kinds of violences. So it's important for us to be very intentional in terms of articulating, bringing in a lens of intersectionality, seeing how young women may have higher vulnerabilities compared to older women, seeing how women in rural areas may have higher vulnerabilities, women with disabilities and other identities that women may have in their lives. So intersectionality is important for us to carry through these 16 days. And also throughout the 16 days, we do have some monumental days to amplify specific aspects of our lives, disability, human rights that are part of the 16 days. And then funding as an important enabler for the work that we do, for those who are at the front line, for women's rights organizations, for feminist networks, for young women activists, and for our governments to be able to invest in and resources, not just goodwill, but actual finances. Shifting social norms, accountability to the laws we've made and programs governments have committed to. So as Kumba has said, we've seen governments put forth policies and programs, but what is the follow through looking like? And finally is infrastructure. I think a lot of the times we focus on response. While response is important, prevention is even better. So we do need to have a balanced approach in terms of how we invest in prevention and response. So it's been an honor moderating this. I'll hand back the program. I wanted us to finish on time, and I think we young people have done a good job of time management, and I'll hand it back the program to Madam Juliet and Udasi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for pinpointing the key elements from the discussion and for such a wonderful moderation. I thank you all our panelists who have been who had to travel to join us for this session from the rural areas of Ghana, Kenya, and from Ghana and other countries. So thank you all panelists for such an insightful discussion and for taking the time to be with us to discuss on such an important issue. So before we close, we all request all of you to open up your videos for a final photo shoot. And then from there, we'll end our discussion for today. Keith, are you on board to take the picture?
I confirm, Udasi, I'm on board already.
Our participants, our panelists, please open your videos for a quick picture before we conclude our session. Thank you, Evelyn. Agnes, Eniola, Ajua, Eunice, Judy, Emanuela, Karen, Christine, Kit, are you able to take the picture? Are we good?
Yes, I was waiting for a few more smiles, okay. Just to complete it. We only have 5 people, and we'll have a full smile.
Roa.
Okay, I've captured.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Udasi.
Likewise.
Thank you, Eniola, for joining from Nigeria, ALF. I see you.
Good afternoon, Melissa.
Afternoon. Thank you, Messi, for joining us from